My name is Catherine McNulty. I am the founder of GriefInspired. I have authored 2 books. I've been on a whole slew of podcasts. I have a YouTube channel with over 220 videos on it now. And I help bring light to the darkness of grief. It wasn't always that way. So I wanted to take a little time to share with you my grief journey, my loss story, so that you can know and believe in your own heart that you can be happy after loss and that it is possible. And I'm sharing my story today because I'm realizing that there are so many people who haven't heard my story yet. And when I focus on grief, I'm using my experience, but I'm really focusing more on those who are hurting, and that might be you. And so I don't necessarily want to make it about me, but in some senses it has to be about me, because you need to believe that because my story, my lost story ended with happiness, that's what you can have too. And that's how I bring light to the darkness, hopefully, of your grief. So I was 38 when I got married. I had moved to Southern California. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I found out that when I came to California, when I visited the first time, I thought this was the most miraculous place in the world. And I thought to myself, why do I not live here? And so I was fortunate, and my company actually moved me back in the days when that could happen. And I started a life here, and I got married. Like I said, I was 38 when I got married. I was building the life that we are all told to wish and want. The successful career, the big house, the white picket fence, the 401k that has enough money for retirement in it, the dog and maybe a cat, and the 2.5 children that society says that we're supposed to have, right? Maybe more. So I was on that path, and I didn't know that when I went to get pregnant that it was going to be an issue. You should also know that I am the youngest of 7, Catholic, Irish, Italian, youngest of 7. I'm also a Gemini. It's a heck of a combination. And so I didn't believe that I couldn't have anything that I wanted. I went after what I wanted, and I usually got it until I wanted to get pregnant. When I got pregnant with my first pregnancy, I was elated, and I was thinking, okay, this is it. I'm like on the way, like I'm making it. I'm doing all the shoulds. I've followed all the shoulds, and I've like conquered the shoulds. And then at 13 weeks, I went into the doctor's office for my second ultrasound, and they couldn't find a heartbeat. But it was just a technician. It wasn't the doctor, and the doctor wasn't there. So they said, well, I can't find a heartbeat, but we're not sure. Can you come back tomorrow? And I left that appointment room devastated, because I knew it wasn't good. And it wasn't because she couldn't find the heartbeat, or because she was incapable, or because she just didn't know what the hell she was doing. It was because there wasn't a heartbeat there. And it was right before Christmas. This was 2009. And we were just about to leave on a trip for my parents' 50th wedding anniversary. 50 years, big deal. My sister had prepared this amazing event in Virginia Beach, in that area, with a big house that we could all stay in, and there was going to be a party and all the friends and family were coming in. It wasn't something that you could miss, and the 50th anniversary happens once in a lifetime. So on the 23rd, I went in for a DNC to remove the pregnancy. And on the 24th, I got on a plane and went to what hopefully it was one of the happiest events of my parents' life. And I walked through that event in a daze, dazed and on medication and stunned by my grief, because it was grief at the time, but I didn't know that that was grief. And somehow I got through that. But my inner drive and the thing that taught me to be competitive, and again, I was the youngest of 7, you had to fight to eat. Right? If you wanted seconds, you had to finish what your first was before you got the seconds. And so I had this competitive nature just from my environment, right? Or maybe it was genetic. I don't know. Maybe a combination of both. But I decided, like, this is okay. Like, that happens. A lot of people have miscarriages, like early on, first pregnancy. Everybody told me, not a big deal. I was able to have the pregnancy genetically tested just to make sure that there wasn't anything genetically, with the combination of my husband and I. So there was no reason not to think that everything was going to be great for the next pregnancy. And so I pulled myself back up and I said, let's do this thing. And I leaned in. And I got pregnant again. And my sister is a pediatrician. And she told me that you have to be at about 25 weeks for a pregnancy to be viable, for a pregnancy to actually become a baby that you can hold in your hands, that would be able to live outside of the womb. And so I was hyper focused on this 25-week mark. And so again, I was working to just make sure I could get past the 13 weeks of the pregnancy. And I was holding my breath because I was scared. I was scared of another loss. And I got past the 13 weeks, and I got past 20 weeks, and I got past 23 weeks, and I got past the 25-week mark. And I was so excited. My belly was starting to get big. I was able to start wearing the maternity clothes, which I was super excited about, because there's that weird spot where you're just kind of fat, but nobody can tell that you're pregnant. So I was starting to look pregnant, and I was so excited. And I was like, okay, we had like that setback, but like everything's okay. That was just like a bump in the road. And at 27 weeks, I had a busy day. I had been making sure that I was doing everything that I was supposed to do. And I had gone that day to a course, it was a breastfeeding course, to talk about how to breastfeed your baby at the hospital that was only a few miles from our house. And during the class, I had a sharp pain, and it was sharp enough that I went, ooh. And the woman that was running the class said, oh, no having babies in this class. And I said, oh no, like this is way too early. I'm fine. At this point, I didn't know what preterm labor was. And I went into preterm labor. Later that night, the pains became more frequent. I hadn't gone into labor before. I didn't know what labor was. I was not thinking that it even could be labor, because you don't have babies until they're full term. That was my belief system. Things don't go wrong in pregnancies. You get pregnant and you have a baby. Like, that's how it's supposed to go. So we ended up going to the hospital, and they started checking, and the doctor told us very, very callously that I was a centimeter dilated, and that they were going to try to stop the labor, but that it wasn't working. And so they had tried magnesium sulfate, the different medications that they give you to try to stop the labor, and it didn't work. And I was going into more and, further and further into labor. It started to really hurt. And I said, like, can you give me something? Because the epidural was not working for whatever reason. And I said, like, can you help me here? Because this is a lot. Well, they ended up giving me Demerol, which first made me barf. And then literally like lose my mind. I blacked out for I don't know how long. And during that period of time, the doctor who was the neonatal pediatrician, came in to inform us, including my husband, of the negatives that can happen with a baby that's born at 27 weeks. So he told my husband about cerebral palsy and hydrocephalus, and that babies can die, and that they could have all kinds of disabilities, and that we needed to be prepared for that. Well, during that whole conversation, I was blacked out on Demerol. When I woke up, it was time to push. He was so little that I pushed, and out he was. And they took him from me. I didn't know that he wasn't okay. And it's the thing that bothers me the most. Because I was like, okay, he's born, he's here. I was so naive that I didn't know that there could have been anything wrong with him. And I hadn't heard the whole conversation. And so I remember being so stupid and so naive and emailing my boss saying, look, I had the baby, not coming into work tomorrow. And I didn't know. But then finally they rushed us back to the NICU. I hadn't seen him. And they said, you need to come now. And it was at that point when I realized that he was not okay. He had had a severe pulmonary hemorrhage, and which is where your lungs fill up with blood, because there's an opening between your heart and your lungs that the baby is not using when it's in utero, because it's not breathing actively. And so when the infants are born, when they're born prematurely, sometimes that doesn't close. And so they told us we have to take him to Rady Children's Hospital to potentially have surgery to close that. And so they said, we're going to put him in an ambulance and you can't come with us. And so at the same time, I met my son, and I had to say goodbye to him so that they could take him to Rady Children's. And being Catholic, I remembered, but he hasn't been baptized. And so we had him baptized. I baptized him myself because I'm like, I don't know how to do this. And so I did my best. And they took him. And they said, you can meet us at the hospital. Go home, pack a bag. Meet us at the hospital because you're going to be there for a while. And so that's what we did. And Murphy's Law, it's Friday afternoon in San Diego on the 5 freeway heading down. And if you've been on that freeway on a Friday afternoon, it's no freaking joke. And so we're panicked, but we don't really know how panicked to be. Right? And so you want to believe and you want to have hope and you want to think that everything's okay. But we were like, okay, they told us to do this. And I'm like, I'm good at following rules. Like, get the bag, go to the hospital. We'll figure it out once we get there. And so they didn't end up having to do the surgery. But now we were in the NICU. And the NICU is the neonatal intensive care unit. Suddenly, I was in this room that had probably about 45 different small rooms. Each one had a baby who was fighting for his or her life. Completely surreal, because again, I didn't even know these places existed. And then I didn't know that there were so many babies. And so over the course of the 6 weeks that we were there, things were up and down. The doctors were trying to tell us that he might die. And I just, like, my mind could not process that. Like, babies don't die. That was my belief system. And this one day, so this is the sweater that I was wearing almost every day. So he was in an incubator. They call it a giraffe. It's an incubator that's enclosed, keeps him warm, keeps him safe. You put covers over it to keep it dark, because babies want to be in the womb and they want it to be dark and quiet, and you can't touch them. And this doctor came in after we had been there for 2 weeks. So we were kind of settling into the routine. We were living across the street at the Ronald McDonald House, who takes care of people who have infants in the hospital. When Jack was born, he was 2.2 pounds. Really, really little. And so here he is in the NICU, and we're just doing whatever you got to do, like keep him alive, like what it, like just, right? I would have done anything. There was a time when they said he needed blood, and babies need a certain kind of blood, and I had that kind of blood. And they told me that he might not be okay, and that he needed this blood. And I remember sticking out my arms, both of them, and saying, take mine. Take all of mine. Because that's what you do for your kids. And they're like, well, no, you just had a baby. We can't take your blood. I'm like, why not? Like, just take it. You need it. Just take it. So he got his blood. And there was another time, so this was about 2 weeks we had been there, and the doctor came in. And I remember talking to her, talking to me, and she says, it's just not right that you can't hold your baby. And we had been there 2 weeks, and I've been looking in this incubator at him and putting my little finger in there and like holding his, like he could put his little hand, like he could wrap it around my finger, like my pinky finger. He was so little. And so we were just looking at him like, just be okay. Just grow, baby, grow. And she told me that, like, it's not right that I couldn't hold him. I hadn't realized that I hadn't held my baby. And I started to cry, which of course like made her feel horrible. And she like didn't know, and like it freaks doctors out, right? Because again, you become a doctor because that's your skill set. And probably a reason why I'm not a doctor today, and why my sister, who is a doctor, said, yeah, you shouldn't be a doctor. And so up and down, he managed to get to 4 pounds. So again, he was 2.2 pounds when he was born. We called him Kilo. At 4 pounds, this was my Jackson. So this was a great organization who took some amazing photos. This was actually the day that he passed. But they managed to, he was on a CPAP machine. Or this was actually a couple days before he passed. He was on a CPAP machine, but he had what was called hydrocephalus, and hydrocephalus is where your brain swells, that there's fluid in it. And even with babies who have, you know, the holes in their brain, there's only so much fluid that can accumulate before it becomes like really problematic. And so they told us that he needed brain surgery, and they weren't sure the extent of the damage that the pulmonary hemorrhage had done, and they wanted to check. And so they would use an ultrasound at the top of his head, the hole that babies have, you know, the soft spot. But they really couldn't, the imaging just wasn't good. And again, this was 2010. I'm hoping now it's better. So they had to do brain surgery. And so I gave my baby away again, sending him into surgery, not knowing if he was going to survive the surgery. But he did, and he came back to me. And at that point, he was on a ventilator because they had intubated him to do the surgery. And once they got the fluid off of his brain, they were able to get good images of his brain. And we didn't know. They said the surgery went well. We still didn't know. Was he going to live? Was he going to die? And there was an incident where the nurses were amazing. So we would be in the room with the incubator that he was in. I had like a big chair that I could sit in, you know, those hospital kind of chairs. And then there was a desk for a nurse to be at, and she was kind of almost always in the room just in case anything happened. And she explained to me that babies who are premature like this, they want to be in the womb. Like they're not ready to be out. And so the things that they like are the dark environment where it's quiet and it's warm, and there's not like, they're not being touched, right? Because like I couldn't even touch my baby originally because it's just too much stimulation for them. And so that was what they said that my baby needed. And so was the environment that we were keeping him with. Well, he was of course hooked up to all kinds of machine. There's a heart rate monitor, and there's the respirator that he was on. And there was an incident where all of the bells and whistles went off. All of the alarms went off. And the exact opposite of what the nurses have been telling me that was good for my child happened. So all of the doctors came in the room because the alarms were going off. It was loud. They turned on all these big fluorescent lights. They literally pushed me out of the way and said, "You need to leave," as my son was on the brink of death. And I'm like, "What do you mean you want me to leave? Hell no." But they were trying to revive my son. And they managed to resuscitate him and have him be okay. But that moment for me was really critical. And they had later finally gotten the x-rays from the surgery, and they told us, "We need to talk to you. We need you to come with us." I was like, okay. And the craziest thing, like just less than a week before this time, again, I told you there were like 45, 50 rooms with different infants in it. And there was a mother that lost her baby. So like it was the first time that I realized that babies die. And it happened. And it was in the night, and the mother wailed. And I could hear her. And I remember thinking, my word, the way we all do, I can't imagine what that would be like. Except that now I can. And I remember feeling so bad for her. And at the same time feeling so lucky that my kid was still alive and that he still had a chance. Well, like I said, it was less than a week later that they took us into a back room. A room where parents of patients weren't normally going. So it was more like a, kind of like a break room for the staff. And they took us back there, and there were the whiteboards where you can put x-ray images on, and they put up 2 scans. And they said, "This is the picture of a normal brain, and this is the picture of your son's brain." And I instantly cried. because I knew exactly where we were and what that meant. And I remember my husband saying, okay, but what does that mean? I don't hear how they answered him because I knew. I knew what it meant. And I knew at that point that our fight was over. And I also remember the time when the lights all came on and the doctors rushed in and I wasn't anywhere near my son. The moment when he could have died. And I said, oh, hell no. I said, if my kid is leaving this world, it is going to be where it's dark, where it's quiet, where he's being held in his mother's arms. And so we made the choice. And that was the day what I learned what it really meant to be a mother, because I wanted to keep him with us. I wanted to keep fighting, believing, hoping, praying that he was going to be okay. But that wasn't going to happen. That wasn't the outcome that we were going to get. And so we switched gears a little bit, and I started to say, we have to do this for him. And so we chose to remove life support. And we waited till the evening because that's what they recommend. There's less activity, less commotion, tends to be quiet. And so we did that, and we sat and we held him and we played soft music, and there were like the little electric candles. You can't have obviously real candles in the hospital, but there was lullaby music. And what was so miraculous about that is that it's something that I really can't explain. But it was when I really, really knew that there was a God. Because somehow during that experience, there was no tears. There were no tears for me. There was only love. There was only love. And I held him, and my husband held him, and my brother had visited, my oldest brother. And so he was there, and he got to meet him. But the rest of the family didn't get to meet him. That makes me sad. But it was this amazing, unconditional love experience where he peacefully and lovingly drifted off to be with God. Because that's my faith. That's what I believe. And somehow I was held up and given the strength during that experience. And it was beautiful. And I can't even describe it. There are no words to describe how beautiful and what a blessing it was to be with him and have him not have gone the way I thought he was going to go before. It was just such a gift. And there was a beautiful, wonderful nurse who was there for us for a lot of it. Amazing young woman who now has children of her own and is married. And I remember joking with her because she was trying to date, and she's like, I'm never going to get married. I'm never going to have kids. And I'm like, okay, look at you now. But what happened then was interesting because we loved on him a little bit, and then she said, would it be okay if I loved on him a little bit longer? And I handed him to her, and I said, absolutely. Because she had been so much a part of our journey too. She knew us. She knew Jack. And I handed him to her. And we left the neonatal intensive care unit. Because what I didn't realize is that when you don't have a baby who is alive, you no longer belong in the neonatal intensive care unit. So you have to leave. And so we left. And it wasn't until I left and got out on the sidewalk that I realized that I really started to fall apart. That's when the grief hit. That is when grief started for me. Real grief. And I sobbed. And we had been doing an online, this was before Facebook was really out. And so we did this like online website where I could like post something. And I had been posting his journey every day where we were. And I'm like, okay, how do I post this? And I had posted that he was going to go. And then I came back and I said, well, how do I finalize this? Because this would have to be, how do I tell everyone who's been praying for us, you know, following our journey? And I went to the prayer, the Memore. If you know that, it's a Catholic prayer. And I can't say it now because it's too much. But it was basically like, help us get through this. And he's gone and he's okay. But I'm here. I'm here and I'm here without him. My husband's here, he's without him. And how do you keep going on? And we had gone across the street to the Ronald McDonald House where we were staying. And suddenly, there was no reason for us to stay there anymore. So we packed up our things, our home, everything that we had known for the past 6 weeks. The people who had been there to support us, the people who became our friends, the place that had become familiar. And we left that too. And we drove home. Because what else do you do? Surprisingly, that had been 6 weeks to the day that I had since I had Jackson. And I had a 6-week follow-up appointment. So I went to the doctor's appointment. So I'm like, well, I had an appointment. And I explained to the doctor there what had happened because she didn't know. And I was literally in shock. So I said it very like matter-of-factly. And she said, why are you here? And I said, where else would I be? And I said, I want to be a mother. I want to make sure that nothing in me is broken. Because I wanted to know if I had caused it. I wanted to know if it was my fault. And I wanted to know if I could ever get pregnant again. Because I was still wanting to be a mother, and like my grief hadn't processed, and I just didn't know. And failure, remember, was not an option for me. And like, you got to try again. And so I turned to IVF. I put my grief on hold because I didn't know what grief was. I didn't know. And I put it on hold, and because I was 40. And I said, well, if I'm going to have a baby, I don't have time to grieve. Like, if we want to have a family, that's what we wanted. And the family that we had suddenly got ripped away from us. And we went back and forth. Should we try? Should we not? But I just wasn't ready. I wasn't ready. I said, I don't want my story to end this way. This is sad. This is awful. I don't want to be this person. And so we tried again. We did in vitro. That's not a joke. did all the stuff, out of desperation, not in hope, but in desperation is how we did that. And by the grace of God, I had 18 embryos. And on the last transplant of the last embryo, I got pregnant with my son, Mason. And Mason is 8 years old today. And he was in the hospital with me on bed rest for the entire pregnancy because, yes, going into preterm labor, Jack's resulting death was my fault. Not in a way where I feel guilty anymore, but in a way because that's what my body did. And that's the way my body functioned. And so when I was pregnant with Mason, we were worried about the same thing happening. And I would have done anything. So I laid down for the entire pregnancy in the hospital on medication to keep me from going into labor. And by the grace of God, we made it to 32 weeks. And Mason was born. And my grief journey didn't start, and I feel like this is a little bit biblical because everything with me is 6 weeks. He was 6 weeks in the NICU. It was 6 weeks since he was born when I had to go back to the doctor. And it was 6 weeks after he was born that I had to go back to work. And the thought of trying to go back to work and leaving Mason, who I feared for his life every day because now I had this knowledge and this knowing that babies die. And I was so scared that it presented itself physically in my body through panic attacks. So when I thought I was about going back to work after that 6 weeks that they let you stay home with your child, no comment there, I panicked. And so at that point, I was so broken. And I was thinking about losing everything that I had worked for. The home and the 401k and the career. And if I don't go back to work, all of that goes away. And so that's when I asked for help. And that's where the healing part of my grief journey started. I had to get help. And so today, after everything that I learned on my own grief journey, I want to encourage people that there is hope, that you shouldn't do it alone, and that you can get through your grief. But I'll tell you what, when I lost my son, when I lost the miscarriage, when I was fearful that something was going to happen to him, and that fear doesn't completely go away, it still freaks me out. I was cracked open. But it put me on a path. It put me on this path. It brought me to you. It's what's allowing me to share my story. And it gave me hope. And I got up in the morning every day and I did what I needed to do, and I figured grief out, and I read and I studied and I podcast and everything that I could think of. Church, all of it, to honor who he was and what we had gone through, and to not have it be this thing that defined me as like, oh, she's the one who lost the baby. Today I am the one who's overcame the loss of the baby. She's the one who helps other people who are grieving. She is grief inspired. And I want that for everyone, for you, any of the people that you share this video out with, because it's too hard and it's too much to do alone. And we as a world need to come together and support each other in a much better way. And my mission and my purpose is to help redefine how this world grieves the loss of the people that they love. To do it better, to do it with honor, and meaning and purpose, and to not have to struggle in the darkness, so that people don't have to sit alone in silence, where the people that supposedly love them around them are telling them to hurry up and get over it. And are you better yet? Like, this grief thing is something like it's all over you. Can you get it off of you? And can you be normal again? The answer is hell no. You're not going to be normal again. I am not normal again. But I am better. And I want that for everyone who has to go through the loss of someone that they care about so deeply, that when the doctors say they need blood, that they would reach out their arms and say, take all of mine. Because that's what love is, and that's what we need to honor in grief. And that's what will help us move forward in the pain and find growth out of that pain and become better and become who we are supposed to be, without the shoulds and the pretense and the bullshit. To be just who God meant us to be. And I am thrilled and honored to have you here with me in this video, to be grief inspired, and to be able to tell you that I want you to be grief inspired too.